We're live.
All right, Senate Education Committee on the afternoon of February 25th. We're taking some testimony as we chart a course forward on the first part of Act 7.3. And today we have a couple of superintendents and one school board member. So we're going to start with Jamie Canardi from, we don't introduce ourselves, but we're each other. So you're on.
All right, thanks for having me. My name is Jamie Canardi. I'm superintendent of schools at the White River Valley Supervisory Union. I'm now in the midst of my 6th year as superintendent of schools and previously served as a principal for 7 years at the Williamstown schools. And this marks my 15th year as educational administrator in the state of Vermont. I want to begin by thanking the Senate Education Committee, allowing me to have the opportunity to testify today on the maps currently being discussed in both the House and Senate Education Committee, along with the policy proposals provided by Chair Bongartz in relation to the map that was introduced last week. I want to also again reiterate that I agree and fully support the intent of Act 73. I also want to thank your committee for the time and effort you've put in throughout the fall and early winter prior to the current legislative session to visit schools, supervisory unions, school districts, and to hear from the concerned constituents across the state. It is clear, based upon the maps and corresponding policy that were introduced to your committee last week by Chair Bongartz, that you've taken the feedback provided seriously and have tried to incorporate it into your proposal. I want to specifically call to your attention that you are considering a hybrid approach to mapping that provides for both supervisory unions and supervisory districts in the future state. I find that to be commendable and want to share my gratitude for that approach. It has and continues to be my desire to approach any and all mergers voluntarily, including mergers of districts that constitute larger supervisory units. And therefore, I want to be clear that I prefer that any and all discussion related to maps align to the policy proposal provided by the redistricting task force. But I also want to be abundantly clear that I much prefer your approach to mapping as compared to the only map produced at the House Education Committee thus far. That map eliminates supervisory union governance structures altogether and results in forced consolidated supervisory school districts. I also want to be clear that type of approach is a non-starter for the WRVSU and the 10 communities that I serve in my role as the superintendent of schools for WRVSU. In addition, it fails to recognize the previous testimony and abundance of public comment that have come from rural communities across our state since H454 was initially introduced. I come to you today to continue to advocate that we ensure that the next steps we take are strategic, intentional, thoughtful, and measured in order to make certain that unintended consequences do not result in a detriment to our students or the future of our rural towns throughout the state. To this end, I want to be clear, I support many of the steps outlined in the redistricting task force report and the corresponding policy provided by Senator Bongartz's proposal. I want to emphasize, though, that any and all changes to governance structures, including to supervisory union boundaries through the drawing of maps, must not be implemented until July 1 of 2027. This provides for the time needed in order to allow for strategic planning to occur in order to have a roadmap for success established prior to becoming fully operational. I want to be clear, I understand that you would be taking action to create those SU boundaries and that they would be implemented starting July 1 of 26, but that what I'm saying is they wouldn't become operational within those boundaries until July 1 of 2027. There's strong evidence that voluntary approaches to create collaborative systems and even voluntary mergers can create cost savings and improve educational outcomes. Cooperative alliances that facilitate cost savings improve systems while still retaining deep local roots make sense. This position statement supports a voluntary process by which collaborative efforts can achieve the outcomes of improved education for students at reasonable costs. So therefore, again, I'm recommending that you then provide for 2 years of voluntary mergers to occur from July 1, 27 through June 30th, 29, to allow for the voluntary mergers to occur as provided via Senator Bongart's proposal. If mergers have not occurred voluntarily by July 1, 29, the State Board of Education could utilize the authority provided to them by the changes proposed to consolidate into the desired number of school districts. While making certain that we acknowledge in legislation that forced consolidation needs to be backed by clear and transparent research data that supports greater efficiency, results in cost savings, and provides for better outcomes for our students. The notion that the act of simply consolidating is going to result in savings and better outcomes for our students isn't supported in research, and therefore requires that clear criteria needs to be developed for any forced consolidation. And it needs to be transparent prior to being implemented by the State Board of Education. I understand that Vermonters are also looking for immediate action to address efficiency, rising costs, and property taxes. Therefore, I want to once again ask that any and all proposals that your committee considers also include the strongly researched policies of cooperative education service areas. And by requesting all SUs and SDs work cooperatively and collaboratively to partner in these service areas by no later than July 1, 2027. This could allow for them to be operational in the immediate future and begin addressing the efficiencies articulated in the redistricting task force report. I don't see this as another added level of bureaucracy and find them incredibly important in order for us to address the needs highlighted in the recently released special education report provided by the Agency of Education. I also want to be clear that I am completely supportive of a change in the education funding formula and believe that our current funding formula consists of too many variables in order to provide predictable tax rates year to year due to the complexity and significant number of elements that play a role in the finalized residential tax rate. I'm going to give you an example. I currently have a unified school district in our SU that is actually requesting $43,112 less from the education fund at FY27 versus FY26. But their projected residential tax rate in FY27 are increasing by more than 14.5%. That doesn't align with the values of Vermonters who seek to find common sense solutions to complex problems. To this end, I believe that the legislature should continue to study, analyze, and works to fix the funding formula with increased research and attention to the foundation formula. This shouldn't be implemented, though, until fiscal year FY30 when the newly formed mergers have taken effect. Therefore, I recommend that you utilize the provisions provided via S220 to provide for an immediate tool to address Vermonters' concerns during fiscal years 28 and 29 until the revised funding formula is implemented in FY30. I want to be clear that I see a spending cap as only a tool that should be used on a transitional basis and needs to assure school districts that it provides for safeguards in order to address things like decreased rates, percentage drop in long-term weighted average daily membership, and impacts on per pupil spendings on things that are out of a district's control. Example, health insurance premiums, because they're statewide borrowed. I'd ask that your committee look to examine whether it makes the most sense to cap per pupil spending or if Act 68 spending may actually make more sense, meaning the money that a district's requesting from the Ed Fund. Based on that would take out some of the unpredictable variables that come into play regarding student weights. As has been previously stated by members of the educational field, data integrity has and continues to be a major concern. Therefore, the approach to look at Act 68 spending, to me, makes some more sense. It's literally education spending minus local revenue. That's how much we're asking from the Ed Fund. Or you could do a combination of the two. Look at Act 68 spending and put, a cap there if that makes more sense for a district because they lost some weighted pupils as an example. So I'm going to give you an example here in a second that talks about a district that I have that has worked really hard to decrease their spending, but their per pupil spending is going up significantly. I also want to ask that any cap on spending also be aligned directly with announced elementary and secondary tuitions for all public and private schools. We can't place a cap on spending per pupil for a district that is non-operating, example, Granville Hancock, or who you heard from their board chair, or has non-operating grades, and allow for district to increase their announced tuition beyond that percentage of the spending cap, because they can't control those costs. I also urge the committee to make certain that we have some type of transitional method in place to deal with a district that loses pupils. This is the example I was just talking about. In the event that per pupil spending is put into place via S220 and not considering Act 68 spending. I currently have one district that has a board approved budget of an increase of less than 1%. The increase is $73,159. That's their increase in their expenditures, but their per pupil spending is up 9.28%. Meaning they would need to significantly cut programming for students in order to comply with a per pupil spending cap, due primarily to a decrease in average daily membership at the pre-K level. And that was specific to that their pre-K students were going to a child care center, that child care center lost their licensed teacher. And the way the regulations read for universal pre-K, if it's not a licensed teacher, I don't get to count those students. And so we lost them in their average daily membership. And we had a drop in rates due to a decrease in free and reduced lunch rate percentage, given changes around direct certification via Medicaid qualification. I'm open-minded and supportive, though, of a transitional tool like S220. But just caution, we need to take all the aforementioned factors into account prior to passing the final legislation. I want to conclude by indicating that I'm in agreement that something needs to occur in order to alleviate property tax pressures, increase student achievement and social emotional growth, as well as increase accountability and efficiency across Vermont's education system. I believe we could accomplish all of this without the need to actually draw lines on a map, but I want to commend your committee for considering a map that provides supervisory unions and places them into law. I believe that I've outlined a timeline around actionable steps that I think need to be taken in legislation to provide for education transformation. The first step would be that cooperative educational service areas are assigned by the end of this session. The districts and SUs know by July 1 where they're assigned to CSAS, that the newly formed SUs that would take effect in law by the end of the session would become operational by July 1, 2027. That voluntary mergers of school districts within newly formed supervisory union and supervisory districts be done by June 30th, 2029, or utilize the authority of the state board to require consolidation as provided via Chair Bongar's proposal. With an important reminder that this must be aligned to research criteria that provide for efficiency and better outcomes for students, meaning that the onus is also on the state board to say that if we're going to require a forced merger, that it's going to result in savings and better outcomes for kids. We need to develop criteria that they're using, not just bigger is better. We need to use temporary spending caps in FY 28 and 29 as provided via S220, making certain that we address some of the concerns I noted previously. And implementation of a revised funding formula would take effect on July 1, 2029 for FY 30, once voluntary mergers have taken place to reach desired numbers of SUs, SDs as outlined in your policy. I believe Vermonters understand common sense solutions, the power of local democracy to solve difficult situations, and have asked for and need a more transparent education funding system. I ask that you consider approaching this work without the needs to draw lines on maps, but also, again, share my sincere appreciation for your approach to mapping thus far. I believe that incorporating SU within your maps integrates the feedback you've received from concerned Vermonters and works to provide protections for rural communities across our state. The good news is that I believe you all on this committee are committed to increasing fiscal responsibility preserving local democracy, and raising school accountability, while also having a strategic plan that results in good student achievement and social ownership. Therefore, I want you all to know that I'm more than willing to partner with you as an educational leader to make certain you have policy and legislation that meets those commendable and incredibly important goals for our students, our communities, and for all Vermonters. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, I've got a number of questions, but I'm happy to flip flop. So on page 2, bottom of page 2, you mentioned consolidating its desired number of school districts. What's that desired number? What are you referencing?
I'm referencing what came out in regards to Chair Baumgart's.
Okay, do you agree with the target?
That target makes sense to me.
Is this all you're thinking, or have you collaborated with some others and come up with kind of what came today?
I've shared this thinking with my board members of the SU board and certainly my administration, and taking feedback. And folks feel like this timeline is manageable. And I also did share it with some other superintendents and board members from across the state, both in SUs and SDs. And I didn't hear any significant pushback at all around what I was testifying to today.
No.
Oh, what are we doing with that?
So you said that you were not in favor of drawing lines on maps. That means you support Senator Huffing's one district or one supervisor.
You know, the one district plan I have concerns about, because again, the same concerns I've had in the past around depersonalizing local representation to a district board. That's what I worry about with that. And so I favor this idea of cementing SUs because that protects district boards on a much more local level, which I think local democracy is good. I think it builds accountability to the system. I believe as a superintendent of the supervisory union that I am held to a level of accountability around fiscal responsibility and academic outcomes and how I best serve the students in my 10 schools, because those board members are beholden to represent the folks of those district towns. And I worry about when we get into a much larger district that we're going to lose the opportunity to have that direct feedback from those served, just like you all report back to the constituents you serve.
How would you do it with seesaw? I mean, you're gonna have to, because I haven't actually wrapped my head around how we do that. But you recommended that we do it by summer.
Yeah, I recommend that you put us all into a seesaw in December, because I look at, when you look at the ed fund, right? In regards to things that could help control special education spending in general across the state is up a great deal. And I believe that those larger seesaws could help us get at specialized programming to better address that. I also think some cost drivers, like example, transportation. Digger actually did a really good article right on transportation around how it's like a monopoly. There's no competition. I think those larger seesaw area region for transportation contracts can help get at that. You know, the seesaw thing in regards to forcing a regional collaboration to address some of those concerns makes a great deal of sense to me, to get at some of that low-hanging fruit, but has major cost. And I don't see it as another bureaucracy, because, you know, in regards to that work, if we said we're going to take a bite of those big money things and better programming for kids, but in regards to special ed, we're very reliant on out of district placements. You've heard me say that before. And when we do that, we lose control in regards to the students' programming and being able to better progress monitor their outcomes. I believe that we need to take control of that programming in regards to our public education system, not be reliant on $100,000 to $150,000 out of district placements. Yeah, and you know, the SU, and what I like about the SU is that you have a model really, SUs operate very much like small BOCES. Right, so we have a model that we know that we can do that.
Yeah, we agreed with that for 2 years. We were advocating all of them super unions, those opposed 2 years ago.
All right, well, there you go.
Yeah, so, back to seesaws or BOCES. So if it's voluntary, do you think that a 1 year timeline is aggressive or is it doable?
For BOCES, I'm not suggesting that be voluntary. I'm suggesting that with the BOCES, if you assign folks areas to a BOCES by the end of this session.
You say requesting all SUs and SDs to work cooperatively and collaboratively to partner these service areas no later than July 22nd.
So what I mean is you assign them by the end of this session and they have a year to get themselves up and running.
So they want to catch. Okay. And then, again, kind of an old topic, but I'm going to hit it again that, so we have the potential of having, if we form or incentivize seesaws, BOCES to be established, that those boundaries could be radically different from the boundaries of, I call it the education leadership boundaries, which is SU, SD, what have you. You see a conflict between the fact that they're not actually, they have different boundaries. Clearly one is business related, the other is leadership related. You see a conflict there?
Well, in regards to if you continue to move forward in regards to keep the minds on the map around your SUs, like you've been discussing, you know that you have this gray area of SDs, right? Within the map you all discussed. You could start to assign those current SDs in or SUs. You can do an overlay of a seesaw map on top of that. And I don't think you're going to impact after they voluntarily merge necessarily, because you're looking at much more bigger regions within the seesaws.
So what's the difference between doing it with a district map or seesaws? Could they be one and the same as far as assigning?
The difference with the seesaws is that they are working together right at an administrative level, and you're not losing your district residents.
Are you thinking 4 seesaws, 5?
Well, I haven't actually drawn those regions yet myself yet. I mean, I'm happy to do that and email.
I was just getting a sense of it, because
I mean, I think that 7 makes some sense to me.
okay, yes, right.
I just wanted to reflect back on the fact that probably one of the most relevant products of the redistricting task force was to give us a 5 BOCES model.
5.
Sounds very similar to, that's a business relationship to a leadership, potential leadership relationship amongst those regions as well.
I believe they use, I think they use the regional superintendent groups again to draw that down. I believe.
Good.
Do you want?
I do, but
I said, I've been thinking about one of the questions you've raised that a while, which is the criteria that the board would use. The board want to engage in forced orchards if they didn't have it. You say develop clear criteria. Have you thought about? I've been racking my brains trying to figure out how to do that.
I just started. I think writing those testimony made me realize that I need to think about that.
Yeah.
So I haven't formalized what that criteria would be yet. I literally, while putting together this testimony, realized I think that's important.
So, Scott, you talked about some clear indication of savings.
Definitely needs to create an indication of savings. Needs to needs to ensure that the partnership works for kids. Right? There's some geography to that. And certainly would not look, and I think your policy already does this, doesn't change operating, how their governance operations work around in regards to operations of the districts.
keep thinking about that.
I will, yeah, no, I will do that.
No, go ahead.
John,
I was gonna poke my finger into the same issue for a second. So you say, cost, results in cost savings, top of page 3, line 3, results in cost savings. Okay. Want to reiterate that we may not be talking about cost savings. The objective, I think the primary objective is cost neutral, like flat, okay? It's a different perspective that we need to keep reiterating that we're really not talking about a savings, especially in the short term, the first couple of years. There could actually be a bit of a bump while we reorganize and let 2 different systems morph into one future system. But we're looking at flattening the budget, not, we're looking at containing costs, not like dramatically flattening costs. That's a hugely different perspective.
Yeah, and I'll correct the record. When I say cost saving, I'm speaking exactly what you described. I see savings over less, decrease of, less of an increase over time.
Creating
And
better
that
efficiencies
comes out.
is gonna make.
For savings over time.
So thank you, because you're helping us think out loud here, during the hot seat too. So, BOCES or Seesaw's concept has been out there for 2 years. And but we left it as an option. Nobody took advantage of it. Well, one did, yes. So any idea why they didn't take advantage of it? It was cost saving or flattening?
I can speak for RSU. Frankly, we've been very much paying attention to this conversation, and trying to make certain that it made sense for our communities. So I would say that that's taking the priority of us pursuing this. That's Jamie speaking for WRB as a director.
Yes.
Okay, the middle of page 3, you talk about your SU requesting only $43,000 of an increase in one fiscal year to the next. That boils down to about, in the foundation formula, that's 3 students, value of 3 students. Okay. So are you at this point relatively comfortable with the conversation that's been going on about foundation formula?
I am, no, I am comfortable with the foundation.
And if I could, top of page 4, you talk about Act 68 and unpredictable variables. The unpredictable variables, it's clear that, year to year, we're all dealing, we have different students, different subset of students. Is that what you mean by unpredictable variables, or?
Yeah,
Wanna make sure.
different weights, right? Like the weights work such, like it's not as I know, but I'm just saying for everybody, you could have a family of 5 move out, right? Who could have a decrease in weights, right? Versus a 5 that moves in. But it could actually, what it's going to cost to educate the 5 that moves in could be more. And so that's my point. The weights are unpredictable in regards to what grade levels the students are served at with the 1-5 family versus the other 5 families. And so that's what I'm trying to say to.
We'll have that same problem with the foundation formula because it's the money follows the way it's student.
Yeah, no, it is when I've said that the foundation formula needs to be researched and nuanced. I think we need to make certain that those weights make sense in a practical application that way. And one of the things that I have been critical about in the past was, and I spoke out against prior to implementation, was Act 127. And I had some concerns about the weight then. You can find me in testimony way back before that was implemented in House Ways and Means, raising a flag around concerns I had around that policy and what it was going to do in regards to spending across the state. And I believe that is part of why we are here today.
One more?
Yeah.
Middle of page 4, the subject was S220 and effects on per pupil spending, what have you, but not written in here was, I think, a comment that you made about pre-K only if licensed.
Oh, yeah. We lost some weights.
But okay, so here's the question. having a licensed practitioner or educator in the community or in the SU is different from counting the number of students who need those services. And then we figure out how best to provide. Is there something wrong with our legislation? Not necessarily all of this, what we're talking about, the fact that you can't get those students recognized because there's not a community licensed pre-K provider. Is that, what's the problem here?
That is the concern, right, Senator? So within Act 166, the universal pre-K, unlike my high school students, right, who can go to an independent school and be served via non-licensed teachers, in regards to pre-K, without a licensed pre-K teacher serving them in a independent preschool, I no longer get to count those students as pre-K students.
Okay. Well,
So you're gonna stay?
Yeah.
We have one question for you. Okay.
Did I make one more comment? Just a comment. At the very end, as you wrap up on page 5, you talk about blah, 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 increasing fiscal responsibility, preserving local democracy, raising school accountability. We got to keep harping on education quality. Okay. And it may not be like totally applicable to your SU, but in our SU, in our region, you know, we got some challenges. We think the initiative that we're trying to exercise is to increase education quality by exercising some of the other levers here. But if we're not enhancing education quality, which you don't have in here, then we got a problem.
I appreciate that, and I think I didn't use education quality, but when I said student achievement and social emotional growth, to me, that meant education quality.
Okay, I guess I was thinking on a different sentence, but I just want to make sure it's constantly, you know, here we go into town meeting week. It's about the kids. It's not about the kids.
100%.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about that. Those issues of different. You see Ryan Siswazius, up at it, taking that today, yeah. But I think it's Michael Livingston.
He's going to speak about education quality in WRVSU.
I am.
Who's Digger?
Ryan Siswazius. At Haven.
Hashtag slay.
Senator, could I just offer, speaking of educational quality, this is a portrait of a learner that I spoke about in my testimony. So there's copies of that for all of you, as well as 3 Digger articles, one on school bus companies and lack of competition, number of Vermont students and disabilities on the rise, and the Yale grad student who did such a nice job of studying Act 46 and lack of cost savings and mergers. So you bought all those.
Yeah, we had it written.
You had it right, right? Okay, so I referenced those. So, first of all, thank you,
So for the record, you are.
Michael Livingston. And I'll jump to that. I'm Michael Livingston. I worked as an educator in primarily the Upper Valley of Vermont for over 40 years. Slightly more than half of that time was spent as an elementary school teacher and administrator in the public school system. I also have 20 years of experience as a teacher and administrator in an independent school. I have been incredibly fortunate to teach in grades K through 12 in a variety of settings. Before I go a little farther into my own background, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I didn't take this for granted whatsoever. This is an incredible opportunity, so I really appreciate it. Thank you for your extensive work regarding education, transportation, in particular. I want to thank you for your commitment to recognizing the importance of supervisory unions. Your work on the behalf of SUs I think is of paramount importance, and I hope to detail some of that in my testimony today. I retired 4 years ago. I was serving as principal at the Tunbridge Central School, where I helped reimagine programming in the first grade school district, moving all kids K to 4 to the Tunbridge Central School and all 5th through 8th graders to the Chelsea School. I'm currently a member of the Sharon Elementary School Board in Sharon, Vermont, and as a result, also a member of the White River Valley Supervisory. Our schools are essential to our communities, just as our communities are essential for our schools. At a recent brainstorming session with our incredibly vibrant and active PTO in Sharon, They generated a list of over 30 activities and events that were held at the school alone last year. And those activities bind our school and our community, helping create a lasting, meaningful connections that are palpable the moment you walk into our school building. Those connections are not an accident. They're the result of strong leadership built around trust and respect that is honestly communicated to students by the entire faculty and staff all day, every day. It's a belief system grounded in a sense of belonging that permeates the school from pre-K right through up to the superintendent. And that success is wedded to an unwavering sense of trust. That trust binds us. Indeed, it connects us. And given the extreme and growing needs of our families in rural Vermont, preserving trust has become the central role of our small rural schools. Trust is the essential ingredient for connection, and it turns out that connection matters a lot. It isn't the number of after-school clubs or sports being offered by schools that matter. It's being seen and spoken to and held and challenged every day by multiple school personnel. That's the recipe for success, and it doesn't happen in mega schools successful only after hours-long bus rides. It happens at your town school, where you are respected, trusted, known, believed in, challenged, and held accountable, where you are truly seen. What I'm describing to you is a highly successful system and one that's driven by strong, passionate leadership. I firmly believe that our examination of educational reform needs to focus on leadership. The question we need to be asking is, what are we doing to cultivate strong leaders? I have witnessed the absolute transformation of our supervisory union in the last 6 years. Please understand, it's not perfect, but I don't know of a system of any kind or at any scale that is. What makes our SU so remarkable to me is the ability of leadership to communicate a vision so clearly, to get so many to eagerly join in, to watch the momentum it creates from across all facets of the school, from the custodial staff to food service personnel, bus drivers, paraprofessionals, teaching staff, and even parent volunteers. Please let me elaborate. Our supervisory union office provides outstanding support while operating at a cost below the state average and improving incomes year over year. And you've heard this before, but it's important to say our SU operates like a mini BOCES or seesaw. An effective superintendent, empowered by engaged boards, can create a distributed leadership team aligned to goals and mission while serving students in districts of varying sizes. I want to highlight the work of some of our key members. Our Chief Academic Officer has overseen the push to coordinate literacy instruction throughout the supervisory unit. Professional development on the science of reading is being offered to all teachers pre-K through 2, and we're using either Haggerty or Foundations, which are both research-based foundational approaches to early literacy across all those grades. We are coordinating the EL language arts programs in grades 3 through 8 throughout the entire SU as well. The Bridges Math program, with its fabulous number corner, I'm a real advocate for numeracy instruction with young kids, is being used by all pre-K through 5 teachers, and Connected Math is the program for 6th through 8th graders. And at the SU, curriculum is guided by the Portrait of a Learner, which I handed out to you, a framework that was generated 2 years ago by a committee of parents, students, board members, paraprofessionals, teachers, and administrators. In my 40+ years in education, it is among the documents I have been most proud to develop. Please find a moment today to take a close look at it, because I regard it as a template for success. It recognizes our need to consider the multiplicity of needs presented by our students and our families. It provides multiple pathways to success, and it honors the enormous diversity of learners that we encounter every day. Our Portrait of a Learner is posted in every classroom in the SU, and it's not as lip service to the administration, but rather as a beacon, reminding us of the 6 pillars of success that we think of: effective communication and collaboration, academic proficiency, creativity and curiosity, flexible thinking, resiliency and well-being, and personal and community responsibility. In the last 2 weeks alone, I have seen multiple examples of this profile in action. Our fifth graders wrote short pieces about why they love their school and their town to read to the elders in our community who gather once a month for lunch. Each grade takes one of those lunches to serve their elders, eat with them, and clear tables and clean up. It is beyond heartwarming. Last week, I listened to the fourth graders at school share their reports on famous people from around the world that they had chosen to research and write about. Each presentation included a portrait they created in art class. The fourth graders were mentored by the sixth graders, who are themselves preparing for a capstone project and a multimedia presentation on a topic of their own choosing. At least I forget. I can't fail to add the presentation here at the State House just several weeks ago, where our fifth graders showcased the all-school composting system that they single-handedly are responsible for maintaining hundreds of pounds of compost a day. Perhaps you had an opportunity to see their comprehensive exhibit, but it's a great example of examining schoolwork and success through this lens. Our SU coordinates food service, and I've seen a huge improvement in the quality of what's being offered. Transportation is no longer the province of each individual school, and there's no question that shared contract so cost. We share the expertise of the special ed director, who currently oversees and coordinates services SU-wide. This year, the White River Valley Supervisory Union created the Waterman Campus Program, where 15 currently struggling students in grades 5 through 10 attend school in the basement of the SU office building in an effort to find their footing and eventually successfully return to their home schools. The program has been a huge success by any and every measure. Students are obviously happy and engaged in the visit. Attendance is at 90% for students who are incredibly chronically truant. And for these vulnerable, high-need students, the other option was to attend an alternative program outside of our district where we would have no oversight of their progress. Those programs cost taxpayers minimally $100,000. Our program cost per student this year is $23,000. This program honestly should be a model for SUs and SPs and for future BOCES or SAWs. Our technology directors help me coordinate all of the various databases under one umbrella program, the Alma. Staff have been trained to reliably use our databases, which allows for our school data teams to more accurately assess the needs of our students. Data is now much more readily accessible to faculty, staff, and parents. And as a result of these efforts, attendance is up and major misbehaviors are down. Our business manager, I don't know what to say about our business manager, except an absolute godsend to our school district, providing a level of expertise and accessibility that a small school like Sharon would never be a different. Boy, have I been talking to her a lot in preparation for town meeting. Anyone who suggests or even implies supervisory unions are incapable of coordinating curriculum, instruction, professional development, and ultimately positive opportunities for our students is wrong. I can literally show you. In fact, many of you saw it for yourselves just a few months ago when you visited the high school in South Dakota. But ultimately, this isn't about just the fact that SUs are capable of replicating what some say is only possible in an SD. The extraordinary difference between these two governance models is that SUs preserve local voice. As a local school board member, I am literally held accountable by my neighbors and friends in town. I have to be able to communicate what we're doing and why we're doing it. The connection between local schools and the school boards is an integral part of the bedrock foundation of our democracy. Any thought that we would be taking steps to dismantle that relationship is, in my opinion, irresponsible. There is no need to do so. No one currently operating a supervisory union wishes to impose our model on everyone else. Why then are those utilizing the supervisory district model so eager to impose their structure on others? It's not just unnecessary, it's counterproductive. I'll just end by saying it's my hope that the legislature would consider 5 actionable steps. The first 4 revolving around real cost drivers that we as board members face. Healthcare, obviously, special education, student mental health needs, which continue to rise, and transportation. The 5th would be to examine the educational landscape in Vermont, identify exemplary programs and showcase them as a model for change and success. That expertise and capacity does exist in our state, And where you find outstanding schools, you're going to find outstanding leadership. So I'll conclude by acknowledging the tremendous efforts your committee has made in the field of collecting relevant data and your efforts taking really extensive feedback in this committee. Thank you for giving this important conversation the justice it deserves. I believe schools can and will collaborate and negotiate voluntary consolidation. I don't believe that we need maps. We need effective leadership, but if we do embrace maps, it is my sincere hope they include SUs. They offer the benefit of scale and the value of finding creative, pragmatic solutions to problems specific to their communities while preserving democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Remarks?
So, Michael, thanks.
Thank you.
A hard decision for me is like when you talk about small schools and how vital they are to communities. I totally understand that. But what is the answer when you run into that it is just not efficient to run that school because of cost? Because everything has a price tag. What's the answer there when that happens?
Yeah, well, I have something of a snapshot into that because at the First Branch district, we actually needed to examine the size of the classes in those schools. We moved the K through 4 into one building and the 5 through 8 another to increase those class sizes. So there does become a time when your class size is so small that I actually feel as an educator that you're actually not serving students well. So I think that the trouble that we all understand is the emotional nature of that conversation for our towns. And I think what we really need to do is convene a group of people who are former educators, who are neutral to the process. We can go in and sit down with those communities and actually have a conversation where you actually go through those costs and benefits, because the costs and benefits are not just dollars. There are student experiences as well.
Oh, see, and that is not lost here in that committee.
Yeah.
However, it does eventually come down to, we just can't keep the school because it's not economically.
And I think that I would agree. And I think that the place where people really end up joining on board is when they recognize we're actually not doing those really small schools, those tiny schools, justice to our children. So we
I
have
agree with children.
8 students in grade 5 been together for 7 years. And in some cases, it's actually really not healthy. Yeah.
So you're on the last page, and all italics, bold. No one currently operating a supervisory union wishes to impose their model of anyone else. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I find it disconcerting that in other parts of the building, the SD model is looking to be imposed on top of all of us. When we actually have a system that's functioning well, saves money, operates at less money per student, and really does function and promote what we consider to be a mini BOCES model. So the idea that we would take and superimpose supervisory districts on top of everyone when we actually have a viable working model right now that's less expensive and keeps our communities involved makes no sense to me.
So if White River Supervisory Union was the model for the state of Vermont, and we're going to say we're going to make that work, how does Act 60 fall into that? How do we make sure it's equitable across the state?
Well, for a supervisory union, I'm not sure that, well, I want to make sure I don't get out of my lane here, but I think that in Chittenden County, a supervisory district is a model that they never let go. They're familiar with it. They feel comfortable with it. And maybe in a larger urban environment, that makes some sense. But when you look at the geography of a SU like White River Valley SU, where it takes a good 40 to 45 minutes to get from Stockbridge, Rochester to Stratford, my concern about running an SD like that with one board of 5 to 7 members, some of whom may not know anything about your school, is that we would lose any connection with our school. And I think opponents of that system are looking for ways to distance the board from difficult decisions about local schools. And I feel firmly that those decisions need to be made at the local level, but we may need to promote and provide access to educators who can go in and meet with towns and talk about what are the services, how is it actually working for students on the, because it is incredibly, as you know.
That's what they do at Kip County.
Yeah.
They do like, CBU.
Yep.
They actually go out to the public, they go and fly very development during those schools. And
Yeah.
so, but they're operating.
I really believe that Vermonters are ultimately very pragmatic and would understand if they were approached in a way that allowed them to enter a conversation without being told what to do, but listen to what's the impact on children that ultimately make the choices.
That's humans, Jen.
One thing I ought to remember to ask all three of you about before we're done here is the right size for NSU as we're going forward. I talked to one person this morning that called me about one of the SUs saying it's too big and it'll be really hard to manage. In fact, and you've made this point before that if it gets too big, it becomes bureaucratic. So just all of you just think about it. We'll come back to that at the end of this discussion about size and make sure we get a feel for, but do you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you all very
And
much.
you're gonna stay, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
absolutely.
Sure.
How's everybody doing today?
Oh, very well.
And
Never gets any better. does it?
Yeah.
never, this is as good as it gets, what you're saying. All right. Hello, my name is Matt Foster and I'm Superintendent of Caledonia Central Supervisor Union. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you about the proposed Senate map and potential changes to Vermont's public education system. CCSU comprises the towns of Cabot, Danville, Marshfield, Plainfield, Peacham, Walden, Waterford, and Barton. We are 5 districts and 7 schools, and all of our schools are very rural. Our SU touches the central part of the state to the south. We touch New Hampshire to the east and make up a good portion of the NEK. 3 of our districts are grades pre-K through 12. 2 of our districts, Peacham is a pre-K through 6, and Caledonia Cooperative District is a pre-K through 8. These 2 school districts do not have a high school and use choice for their students. Our SU was put together as a result of Act 46. The Cal Co-op District was created with Walden, Waterford, and Barnet and was placed in CCSU. Cabot and Twinfield had their SU merged with CCSU. This merger resulted in several teacher and support staff contracts being utilized by the various districts in our SU. I bring this up as a point of consideration as the legislature continues to work on how to bring districts together or to rearrange our state school districts and SUs for the purpose of improved efficiency, money saving. I understand the clarity along the idea of trying to reduce the cost over time as opposed to just saying, hey, from one year to the next, we're not spending X dollar per now.
And hopefully create educational opportunity too.
That's for us. And we hope to improve educational outcomes for our students, which is right there. But I want to stop on the money saving piece because I understand what your folks intent is there and I agree flattening that cost curve. So looking at the current Senate proposed map, I believe all of our districts are more hopeful than under the House proposed map. Our Peacham and Cal Co-op districts are thankful for the Senate's consideration of school choice for their secondary students. I think that all of our districts are appreciative of not being forced into mergers and requiring mergers if the state's goals have not been met. Seems a reasonable compromise. Reducing the SUs and districts by at least 50% sounds wonderful. If the mergers can be completed in a thoughtful manner that results in efficiency, money savings, and increased achievement, instead of time spent on navigating the intricacies of merging communities and contracts, which creates community strife, turmoil, and focus on many things not student related, which I'm sure you've heard as a consideration. However, I want the Senate and the House to remember how challenging and time consuming it was to navigate and complete the mergers under Act 46. Despite that effort, the state has not yet completed a formal study to measure Act 46 success. I know we had yet that person from Yale that looked into it for us, which is great and I think helpful. But one may consider the current state of Vermont's public education system the result of Act 46, or at least in part, but This was the state's last attempt at consolidation. Either way, I do think it is important to consider Act 46's history as we try to improve current legislation to support public education. Last year, CCSU finally achieved one contract for support staff and one contract for certified staff, and that was a hallelujah. And oh my gosh, and how did we get there? That was wonderful. It really was. It was an accomplishment that did improve efficiency and made streamlining of decisions because you didn't have to consider, oh, which school was this from? So therefore, we have to go with that particular historical contract or what. So it did. By getting to that point, finally, it helped us. The way we're able to respond to teachers and support teachers and staff, as well as eventually have that impact on students more quickly that we were looking for. I can say just as there have been unanticipated challenges in negotiating a statewide contract to reduce health insurance costs, there have been many unanticipated challenges in reaching an agreement on these CCSU contracts. As the state considers consolidation and mergers, please note that the CCSU legacy contracts with the highest compensation did carry over to the newly ratified contracts. We did not save money on salaries as a result of Act 46. There were other positive outcomes, I believe, but salary cost reduction was not one of them. Salaries and compensation make up about 80% of our school budget. We're a people organization, just as you are, so I'm sure this makes sense. So ultimately, school consolidation improved the efficiency of increased salaries for our staff. I believe our staff are worth those increases. We definitely wanted to level the playing field for our staff. It did not seem fair to have some staff earning lower salaries than their counterparts just down the road. I've also heard, but I also want to say that taxpayers are responsible for paying the salaries that result from Act 46. I've heard that reducing the number of schools is the ultimate money saver. That will result from Act 73, and that makes sense. But we saw the recent vote results for closing 2 elementary schools nearby here fail. And if the state wants to close schools, the process for doing so must be meticulously laid out, and a time frame longer than what is being proposed must be provided to our communities and taxpayers. I think it's important not only to create a map to improve efficiency, reduce costs, and enhance student achievement, but also to put in place a more thoroughly conceived process to execute the plan and achieve these goals. In other words, the details, right? That's where the devil is. Act 46 taught me that competing contracts, community resistance to school closures, salary variability, multiple lengths of the workday, various ancillary insurance benefits provided by different districts will take longer than 2 years to complete contract negotiations, whether forced or voluntary. I applaud a simpler funding method for our communities and schools, but changing the method and implementing the new funding formula while new contracts are still being negotiated will exacerbate an already challenging situation and negatively affect staff, in turn affecting our students' ability to learn. Please consider the implementation timeline or consider a hold harmless provision for a longer transition period to make this switch to new school finance methods smoother. When I worked in Illinois, I had the opportunity to work in school districts with enrollments ranging from 12,000 students to 21,000 students. In the larger suburban school district, we were large enough to run our own specialized instructional programs for students with needs that occur with less frequency. The same district with 21,000 students was also a member of a special education BOCES. This was a benefit to us in many ways. I think that BOCES can be part of the solution to improving education for our students in general, and particularly for students with special education needs. The current upheaval in Vermont public education is holding back the development of additional BOCES. When I heard that question earlier today, why don't we have more BOCES? There's a lot of unknowns out there. Start going down a path, right? Develop those. If you don't know that person's going to be your next door neighbor, make it a challenge right now. The OA's recent report on the state of special education of Vermont outlined how our schools do a great job of providing inclusive education for many students with special education needs. I've seen it in the schools I've worked in. I agree wholeheartedly with this. It is something to be proud of. But we struggle with more specialized or intensive supports. I do think that in general, smaller school districts struggle to provide more intensive support for many students with special education needs. As a result, many districts end up sending students to programs outside their own districts, which is costly. As more BOCES are developed, we can provide needed specialized support regionally, a model that is educationally sound and fiscally responsible. These larger districts that I worked for in Illinois were largely inexpensive. The cost per student were higher in the suburbs than in rural areas. Larger size does not mean less expensive. Much of the financial inequality in Illinois stems from reliance on local property taxes, which creates economic disparity and educational inequality. As complicated as our school funding method is, we're fortunate in Vermont that we structure our funding system to fight those financial inequalities. And it's important to consider those things as we're moving forward with the foundation. And I know you folks are considering that. I just want to tip my hat off to you with the state for always having that, at their heart. We're trying to figure out how do we fund public education and meet the needs of all of our kids. Not only were the large districts expensive per student, but the community members were also less engaged. We are fortunate that in Vermont, you can still visit the transfer station, learn everything you want about any local government issues. One loses that connection with large organizations. SUs allow for economies of scale, administrative overhead, and maintain more opportunities for local involvement in school boards, which will be reduced as districts get larger. And as it's been mentioned earlier, I wholeheartedly agree that SUs are a form of OCs already. In closing, the proposed Senate map has many positives. I applaud you for it. OCs can alleviate many current challenges by increasing districts' capacities to serve students and sharing costs, but they cannot be easily established in the current climate of public education. Bigger does not mean cheaper. Act 46 had a large impact on Vermont public education, and I learned that one should lengthen timelines to allow for mergers and consolidation, expect unanticipated variables to delay progress and increase costs, expect salaries and benefits to go up and not down. And I appreciate your thoughts, though, that we're looking at trying to flatten that curve as we go forward. And I appreciate that. But I just wanted to be able to share what my recent experiences are with looking at negotiating contracts. SUs provide an efficient, economical way to organize central office leadership and maintain community involvement for smaller districts. I'd also like to put in a little push for Twinfield, Marshall and Plainfield. When we were going through the redistricting task force, they were putting in their 2 cents for being included in more of a Montpelier centric area. And so far, the various maps have not shown that. And I just wanted to, I know that you folks have been very responsive to feedback, and I'm going to be doing my due diligence serving the communities of Marshall and Plainfield that they do most of our shopping down here. Their community is more connected to the Montpelier area. So as you consider looking at those boundaries, please consider Marshall and Plainfield having more of a, I would say, center of focus towards this area for Montpelier. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. So thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Yes, and I appreciate just questions that I have answers to. So please.
Okay, well, here's what you may not.
That's right.
So I'm not familiar with the layout of Caledonia Central Supervisory Union. So does St. Johnsbury exist on their borders or inside?
These are the borders.
Okay,
Yeah.
so do you have any thoughts on how to respect the contribution of the independent schools to the community and to the education landscape, given that, you're in proximity to them and many folks who comment on their value don't necessarily have your experience.
Sure, I appreciate that. There's a long history of Linden Institute and St. Johnsbury County serving the communities there that surround that area. And I think that an SU would allow for that support to continue or that interaction or the traditions. Logic does not always follow education decisions. There's a lot of emotion attached to it. So if you have alumni associations or the history, that's where your dad, your grandfather, your mother, aunts went. And, I think that could still be honored by having an SU and allowing for those communities to be able to still be served by those institutions.
Sorry to interject, but we just lost our video.
Please ask more questions.
So
You have audio?
we have audio still.
Can we do that? Can we do audio?
I do.
Yes.
Okay, I will send it to you.
It's not a visual based. Good one.
Yeah, that issue in my committee.
Okay. Other questions?
Can I, just as a follow up?
Sure.
So how would you, maybe even, how are independent schools now represented in the governance of an SU, or how could they be represented in the governance of an SU? Because they're
semi-autonomous, really. Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
So how do we find that balance?
Well, I think that we've had some outreach recently over the last, for me, this is my second year in Caledonia Central. been in education here in Vermont for 10 years. I've been in education since 1998, about 20 years in administration in general. So I've been most recently having my experience just been associated those two institutions. The director's been reaching out and they've been trying to build more opportunities for the director of for both St. Johnsbury as well as Linden Institute. And at least with my district or my SU, I can say for sharing of information and how they want to be able to work on realizing that's our kids that are attending those institutions. How can we be more informed and be a part of that process? So I can say there's been outreach from both of those directors over the last 2 years of trying to improve that. I can also share that with the Caledonia Cooperative School District. They've had conversations with both St. Johnsbury and communities to try and be able to see how they could even start to consider supporting special education students in more of a regional concept or idea of support. So there has been some more outreach recently, I would say, and it tends to work together. Although one of the things that have been somewhat of a hurdle for us is the uncertainty around where we're going to be in the next couple of years. I don't want to use that as an excuse. I'm just saying that that has definitely been how much time you have to put into it, not knowing where you're going to be.
Okay, so if I can just to clarify, so currently, and I know you know the answer, but I'm not quite 100% confident. Currently, the school board of a particular town represents the interests of their individual students. There are individual students who may be tuition to an independent school. Is there any mechanism you could foresee in the future where the independent school is represented in the potentially larger school board in some other mechanism other than, you know, that you got the public school?
Well, you're asking a question whether that I would like to see that happen. I'm not sure if the independent schools feel that way. I don't know. I can't speak for them.
We're just searching.
Yeah, I
don't know the
think
solution.
I think the independent is the independent A right there, right? Whereas supervisor union, it's a union. We're definitely looking out to support each other's schools and how can we go ahead and improve. And I'm not saying they're not trying to be best by our students, but it would definitely have to be almost an extra, almost, I don't say exactly it's quasi, but it'd be probably along the lines of just a working group or something along those lines.
Thank you.
So did you have,
I had another question, but I'm happy.
go ahead. That's all I can see with the board.
I have no more questions.
Okay, so go ahead.
So maybe relative more to Senator Peppermin's single district now. How do you feel about school choice? Maybe even on a statewide basis?
That'd be interesting. I think that under the current financial system, I don't think that would be feasible just because you don't know where kids are going to go from one year to the next. It just makes it too volatile. If there was some other situation where you knew you actually had the number of dollars associated with them, and you weren't fighting for transportation, that might be a different conversation. But I think it makes it too variable and sort of volatile from the year to year planning, not knowing where those kids are going to be. So I think there would have to be something where you would say, you're going to be here for 4 years or something along those lines. I'm just saying you'd have to have that kind of predictability for staffing and decision-making and planning. As a school district, we know our kindergarten's in first grade, so in second grade, you would need to have some sort of.
But if that volatility, potential volatility in student assignments could be flattened out or mitigated in one manner or another, are you supportive of the kids?
You know, without looking at what those, that flattening out was, it'd be, I don't want to speak to it, but like I can say the challenge right now with the unpredictability and variability from one year to the next, not knowing the number of students you're going to be serving.
Okay, thank you.
So for all three of you, coming back to the question that I asked, so there's an agreement, and you said it, or I think that well, maybe all three of you in some ways said it, that in some ways SUs are BOCES.
Yeah, we are.
And is there, there's an agreement which if the SU was at a certain scale, it would almost truly be the BOCES, or could be, and the side would be one or another SU next door. But so I had this call this morning, and it was a person from, I won't say which one of the proposed SUs going, it's so big geographically, and with a number of districts that you're gonna have, that it's gonna be an impossible job for a superintendent to do. You know, part of my answer was, well, yeah, it won't require more people than you have now between the two SUs in that instance. They'll just be organized differently under one. But so I guess, but at a certain point, and Jamie, you made this point with your before, that if it gets too big, you become bureaucratic, and you lose some of what we're trying to gain. And so as we're thinking about, you know, the number of SUs that really makes sense and trying to get them to scale so that they can be closer to their own, truly be close to their own BOCES. Is there some, the ones that on the map that I put forward, you know, they're between 2,500 and 4,000. So what do you think?
It's not the size and number of students. I really do think.
Yeah, Senator Weeks made that point, but
Yeah.
it's a number of
I realize
schools.
it's really the geography. And, you know, when I came to Vermont, I learned that you can't get there from here.
Yeah.
You know, and we all understand it when we live here. And in the Northeast Kingdom, I think that really holds true to a large extent. So if you're looking, for North Country, for example, that area, if we were looking at having 1,000 square miles or something, I do, that seems a little excessive, to try to be able to meet the needs, be boots on the ground, and be able to serve your community as well. I think that would be a challenge. So what is that right size? I think that's one of our challenges here right now, is people looking at that individual geography and what the actual little buildings are and trying to project what that future's going to look like if we actually have fewer facilities, maybe because we have done some murders of that nature. But, you know, unfortunate that my SU, when I took it on, they brought on, before I came on, an assistant superintendent to try to be able to help with that geographic distance. So as you do build these larger, if you were to have those larger areas, I do think that you would have to have a consideration of, all right, I'm going to kind of have sub districts or larger units within the units or something like that. And I think that starts to play towards what Jamie was saying, is it becomes somewhat bureaucratic at that point.
So what you're saying, this is interesting. It's a good discussion because you're saying, and that really has less to do with the number of students than it does geography and number of schools, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a
True.
principal of 100 kids, and I've been a principal of 750 kids. It's the same problems. They're just more of them. All right, and people are people. So I really do think an example I think I can use here would be when I was a principal at Craftsbury, or even seeing how Cabot is run. You have more than one physical building. It's hard to react in the moment to be able to support the students and the kids crossing the campus, right? So if you have an SU that's geographically sparse and spread out, it's hard for you to have boots on the ground to meet the need, unless you do kind of start to have other regional people filling that role.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, right? I think it's based on the geographical nature of the SU. And to me, it's like an hour and change. To me, it makes sense. And the SU I serve right now is the second largest geographically, and it's east-west, so it takes an hour and change. And the map you created, I think you took geography into account, and so that you didn't actually add any larger travel distance for the SU. And Michael spoke to leadership. I believe that leadership requires you to be visible and present. And so as long as these SUs allow for leadership to continue to be visible and present and understand what's happening in their classrooms on a regular basis, and it's not relying on middle management in order to do that, then I think you've hit the sweet spot. I also think it's amount of districts that are going to be served by the SU. And to me, that, when you start to get to more than, 10 to 12 district boards that you're serving, and realizing that part of this is going to consolidate those districts, right? And part of your policy proposal is that you get the SUs in place, you get them up and running, and then you're working on voluntary mergers after that.
Yeah.
That is doable.
Do you see a future where the larger district with a single superintendent has an associated school board, which is representative of the larger region, but the existing districts can still report into that larger school board? And the superintendent focuses on the larger school board and not the, not the micro school board? That's kind of the solution that we're looking for. So communities can still exist to float their issues, grievances up to the larger school board. That's all about governance. And I think something that might be missing here is we don't have an organization chart anywhere for what we're really looking at. And that's what we're really looking at, is that the community can still be represented, on a micro basis, but they're reporting into a macro system that works directly with very professional, qualified superintendents.
I think the worry that I have with that, Senator, is that if that district school board doesn't have a direct line and chain of communication directly to hold the superintendent accountable, that superintendent could quickly ignore the needs of that district. And I am now speaking, not Jamie as a superintendent, I am speaking as Jamie, a citizen and townsperson of Calais, who voted to keep his school open in Calais, that when I looked at that district budget, I didn't see the cost drivers actually being that elementary school. That was the cost drivers to that district. So I voted to keep that elementary school open because I felt like there was other things that could be done to better address the budget concerns for Washington Central. And I worry with what you just said, that if we lose the ability of that local district board to have that type of representation and just rely on that larger district board, that we can start to make decisions for the smaller districts, as you said, that are going to harm those districts because the larger district board doesn't have that local perspective or representation. And that's the worry I have about a model as you're describing. I still want to make certain that local, and again, local, we're talking about mergers of districts. So we're talking about now boards across multiple towns, but that are still serving those communities and that they're elected and held to represent those communities. And so that's the worry I have in that regard, because Washington Central Unified District Board was really clear. They were going to close Calais. And I believe, and again, I speak to this as a Calais citizen, say they were going to close Calais to not change some things that they need to change at the middle high school. And if you check their budget, that is what's driving the increase in their tax rate right now.
So let's do 1, 2, 3, and we're half an hour behind. So,
Well, just a quick question, I think for Senator Weeks. Is the proposal that this larger board, would it be based on population with who's on that board? Or is that, yes,
Well, my friend, that would be
That's a
determined
policy
by
question.
the Government Operations Committee, who we gave a heads up 2 months ago to start looking at these scenarios. Frankly, they haven't gotten off the dime yet. So I don't know what the answer
wondering
is.
what you envision.
Okay, I envision that in the first go round, that all the local district boards remain intact. And they report up to the larger board. The local school board, local,
Like the SD board.
whatever, I'm not gonna use SU, SD. So the boards as they exist now. They still get elected, that, perpetuates, that represent the micro community. And then you have the larger district, whatever nature, I agree, SU. But there's a school board associated with that larger district. And those smaller districts report into to ensure that the communities are still represented. So you don't have, let's say, larger district, hypothetically, 10 school board members. That those 10 school board members have geographic responsibility in different parts of that region. And you maintain that so that everybody feels the sense of democracy. They report into a smaller the school board.
So I see a hand over here.
That is a supervisory union, Senator,
Right.
what you're describing. And if, as Michael described it, so, and we're supportive of exactly what you said. And that this note, supervisory unions are already within statute charged to oversee curriculum, to oversee special education services. And so that larger SU board is doing exactly what you're saying, but they are made up of appointments from those district boards. So I absolutely concur with you. I think what you're describing makes total sense. And that's why I think that supervisory union governance structure is so critical in order to do exactly what you just said. And if you were to look at our SU agendas, and I can send them to you, you will see that how we report to each one of those districts in regards to our progress monitoring reports on student data around academic achievement and social emotional achievement. Those goals are actually set at the SU level. That's where the strategic plan is. And every one of the principals in our SU report out in progress monitoring reports on those ends each month. And you'll see the agendas look very similar.
Senator Hufford.
I'm not gonna add into the mixer.
Okay. Senator Williams? No, okay. So one question I have is one thing I know about boards is that they meet too often. It's like they all want to be, I'm not talking school boards, I'm talking about boards. They tend to want to meet too often. And an efficiently run organization has fewer board meetings than more. I think school boards tend to meet, they all tend to meet monthly. Is that necessary, or could we set the system up so that every other month? Is there any reason that it really makes sense to meet monthly?
I think monthly works good in regards to holding the administration accountable. In regards to making progress on their strategic plan. And so what I would say to you though is that does a non-operating district need to meet every month? Absolutely not. But an operating district that's responsible for students that we are educating, they do. And what I think we have right now in regards to efficiency or a lack of efficiency is we actually have boards meeting twice a month. Like I had a colleague say to me that's a superintendent of an SD. I don't know how you do it with 6 districts. And I said, well, my district boards meet once a month. They piggyback. So one board starts at 5:30 and their meeting goes to 6 and starts at 5:30 and goes to 7. And then another board starts at 6:30 and they go to 8. And we set up the agenda that I'm on in person with one board at the start. And then I join virtually with the other board and I flip in regards to me being in person each month, but they're meeting once a month. And then committees, all the committees, just like Senator Weeks said, those are all at the SU level. The district boards do not have additional committees. So our policy committee is at the SU level. Our negotiation committee is at the SU level. So it's not each district's having to have on top of that multiple committees. So what you see in the SU is that we have our district boards, we have a couple committees, superintendent evaluation committee again is one. And then we don't have things like a transportation committee in each district. And so if you look at the actual boards and committees on an SD page versus my SU page, I actually think you'd see that I'm out about the same amount of nights a week as a lot of superintendents within SDs. They're not setting up their governance as an efficient way.
Matt, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I support a lot of what Jamie was saying with regards to holding administration accountable with regards to progress of strategic plans from school level, academic or social emotional growth, things of that nature. But I think you can also do that with reports. So I do think that you do not have to tie your hands with a monthly meeting. You can always call a special meeting if you need to. RSU only this year decided to add a couple more meetings. They didn't meet every month. But at the district level, there are probably a couple of meetings a year that you could say, we could probably roll this over. Instead, it's going to be a real short meeting, and we have those real short meetings. So could we have that flexibility? Yes, because if you do need to meet, you're good to me.
To have that flexibility, they have to by statute.
Well, that's a good question.
But by statute, they're supposed to be.
Yeah, and when we do our reorganization here shortly, we're gonna say what's our standard meeting time and what night, and things of that nature. And I appreciate you saying, Jamie, yeah, it's in there in statute.
Yeah.
Some flexibility there might be good.
That's why I'm working on here because we have to stop, but, one question. I really take in and accept the notion of, if you get too large, it becomes bureaucratic and more money, what we're actually trying to accomplish. But what about the notion of if you really have a large supervisory union and assistant, who you hire and who might take responsibility for the southern end?
That's what I do.
Okay,
Kind of.
you have somebody who
Yep, Dr. Mike
knows
Moriarty.
you purchase some, okay, good, okay,
And,
thanks.
and that was, like I said, inherited. And, because, Mark Tucker, who I replaced, when he was hired and they had merged a couple of SUs into CCSU, they said, hey, we'd like to provide you with an assistant. He said, no, I got this. He did his time and towards the end, he's like, I was wrong. He really needed to have, Houston, we own. So we implemented it, and Mike and I, we divided the schools, and we still call them our schools. But he's got standard weekly meetings with all of his principals. I've got standard weekly meetings with my principals, and I was just thinking last week, do I want to flip it next year? So that's what we do.
Thank you. That was really thoughtful testimony.
I appreciate your listening and your question. Yeah.
Always.
Thank you.
I want to take a break until 3:10. Right, then we have a little something to do to get that system up running. It's have a whole other.
May I?